Picture this. You're 13 years old, kneeling on chilled marble in the banquet hall of the Eastern Han Court. The year is 137 AD, and winter has turned the palace into a tomb of frozen stone. Your knees ache against the floor. Your breath forms small clouds in the air, but you don't move. You can't. The gold-rimmed cup trembles in your small hands, the liquid inside catching the light from 1,000 oil lamps. It's wine, sweetened with honey and spices from provinces you'll never see. The emperor's gaze does not waver. His eyes are black stones, unblinking, ancient beyond their years. Around him, courtiers hold their breath. Guards stand like statues. Even the musicians have stopped playing. You sip. The wine slides across your tongue, warm and thick and impossibly sweet. You swallow. The liquid burns a path down your throat, pools in your empty stomach. You wait. Your hands are still shaking, but now you must set the cup down with perfect grace, with no sign of fear, because any hesitation might be interpreted as suspicion, as knowledge, as conspiracy. Your stomach is calm, but you know from experience that some poisons take hours. You've watched your own brother die just 3 months ago, right here in this hall, after tasting the emperor's breakfast. First came the foam, white and frothy, spilling from his lips like waves against rocks. Then the spasms, his back arching until you thought his spine would snap. Then the silence, the terrible final silence as his eyes went glassy and his fingers clawed at nothing. They dragged his body away before the emperor even touched his food. Behind you, slaves bring forth the next course. Pickled boar snouts glazed with fermented bean paste, melon rinds stuffed with minced pheasant, crimson wine from clay jars sealed with wax, perfumed rice arranged in the shape of mountains, lotus roots carved into flowers, duck eggs preserved in ash for 100 days, their yolks dark as jade. All must be tasted, all must be survived. And the worst part? The antidotes sitting in small jade vials on the physician's table don't always work. Sometimes they're expired, sometimes they're fake, sometimes they're poison themselves. This was the fate of royal food tasters, from ancient Persia to imperial Japan, from the banquet halls of Rome to the underground kitchens of Byzantium. Some were loyal servants who volunteered for the honor. Others were slaves with no choice at all. All were replaceable. Your predecessor lasted 6 months. The boy before him, 3 weeks. You've survived 2 months, which makes you practically ancient in this position. Until one day, one taster tasted correctly, recognized what was happening, and made a choice that brought an entire empire to its knees. Before we continue this journey through history's most terrifying dinner tables, consider hitting that like button and subscribing. Drop a comment below and let me know where you're watching from. It's incredible that we're exploring these forgotten stories together from different parts of the world, connected across time and space by our shared fascination with the twisted realities of power. Let's begin with a simple question. Why did this job even exist? You don't need an army to kill a god. You need honeyed figs and a loyal hand. The ancient world understood this truth with crystalline clarity. Kings could surround themselves with guards, build walls 50 feet thick, sleep in rooms accessible only by secret passages. But eventually, every ruler had to eat, and food had to be prepared by someone, transported by someone, served by someone. Each step was a potential death sentence, each person a potential assassin. The earliest records of official food tasters come from Assyria, around 700 BC. Stone tablets describe a position called the Rab Shaki, the chief cupbearer, who would taste the king's wine before every meal. But this wasn't some honorary position given to trusted advisors. These were young men, often captured in war, whose entire value lay in their expendability. If they died, well, at least it wasn't the king. In ancient Egypt, pharaohs employed entire teams of tasters, organized into shifts that worked around the clock. They didn't just taste solid food and wine. They tested the water used for bathing, the oils used for massage, even the smoke from incense burners. Because poison could enter through skin, through lungs, through any opening in the body's defenses. One papyrus from the reign of Ramesses III describes a conspiracy where assassins planned to kill the pharaoh by poisoning the linen wrappings used in his evening bath. The poison would have been absorbed through his skin while he slept. The plot was discovered when a taster who handled the fabric developed blisters on his hands and confessed under torture. Babylon took it even further. Under Nebuchadnezzar, tasters were required to eat from every dish 3 times. Once when it was prepared in the kitchen, once when it arrived at the banquet hall, once immediately before the king ate. The logic was simple but brutal. Some poisons worked immediately, others took time. By forcing multiple tastings at different intervals, you increase the chances of catching delayed-acting toxins. But here's what makes this truly horrifying. The tasters knew they were going to die eventually. It wasn't a question of if, but when. Chronic exposure to small amounts of poison, even if they didn't kill you immediately, accumulated in your body. Your liver failed, your kidneys shut down, your hair fell out, your teeth loosened, your vision blurred. Ancient texts describe tasters in their 30s who looked like they were 70, bent and trembling, their bodies destroyed by years of microdosing venom. And yet the job was always filled, because in a world of slaves and conquered peoples, of rigid hierarchies and absolute power, being close to the king, even in this capacity, offered something valuable: access, information, the faint possibility of advancement. Some tasters parlayed their position into positions of influence, becoming advisors precisely because they were present at every meal, every private conversation, every moment of vulnerability. But most just died, forgotten, replaced, their names never recorded, their suffering never acknowledged. Kings feared more than assassins. They feared cooks. They feared gardeners who might taint herbs. They feared wine merchants who could be bribed. They feared their own wives, their own children, their own brothers. In a world where power passed through bloodlines, where succession was never guaranteed, poison became the weapon of choice for anyone too weak for open warfare. And so the food taster became essential, not just a precaution but a necessity, a human shield made of flesh and stomach acid and desperate hope. The Romans would perfect this art into something approaching science, but they would also reveal its ultimate futility, because no matter how many people taste your food, all it takes is one moment of carelessness, one conspiracy that runs deep enough, one poison creative enough to slip through the cracks. To live as Caesar, you had to die a little every meal. Rome didn't invent political poisoning, but they elevated it to an art form so sophisticated that it makes modern espionage look amateurish. In the homes of senators and emperors, in the villas of the wealthy and the apartments of the ambitious, poison was more than a weapon. It was conversation. It was power. It was the invisible hand that shaped dynasties. You're standing in the dining room of Emperor Claudius on an October evening in 54 AD. The walls are painted with scenes from Homer, lit by bronze lamps that cast dancing shadows. The air is thick with the scent of roasted peacock, honeyed dates, wine spiced with cinnamon. But beneath those pleasant aromas, there's something else. Fear, sharp and metallic, like blood on the tongue. Three tasters stand against the wall. Their eyes never leave the food. They've already eaten from every dish, drunk from every cup. One of them, a Greek slave named Demetrius, is sweating despite the cool evening air. His hands shake slightly. The other two notice but say nothing. Weakness is contagious. The emperor reclines on his couch, surrounded by family. His wife, Agrippina, smiles at him with perfect serenity. Her son, Nero, barely 16, picks at his food with the bored expression of youth. They don't know, at least not officially, that the mushrooms being served tonight have been specially prepared. Claudius loved mushrooms, particularly Amanita caesarea, the Caesar's mushroom, a delicacy gathered from the forests north of Rome. They were earthy, nutty, slightly sweet when cooked in olive oil with herbs. His favorite dish, the tasters had already eaten several. They seemed fine. No vomiting, no convulsions, no foam. But Amanita caesarea looks almost identical to Amanita phalloides, the death cap, one of the most lethal organisms on Earth. And the poison in death caps has a particular quality that makes it perfect for assassination. It doesn't act immediately. You eat the mushrooms. They're delicious. Your stomach feels fine. 6 hours pass. 8 hours. You go to bed thinking you've survived another meal. Then, around hour 10, your stomach begins to cramp. Just a little at first. Maybe something disagreed with you. But then, the cramps intensify. You're vomiting. You have diarrhea so severe you can't leave the latrine. You're losing fluids faster than you can replace them. Your organs are shutting down, one by one, as the poison destroys every cell it touches. By the time symptoms appear, it's too late. There's no antidote, no cure, nothing to do but wait for death. Claudius died in agony 12 hours after eating those mushrooms. The tasters? They were fine, because they'd eaten regular mushrooms. The poisoned ones went straight to the emperor's plate, served by a trusted servant who'd been bribed, or threatened, or convinced that putting Nero on the throne was for the good of Rome. No one was ever formally charged. Agrippina became empress mother, Nero became emperor at 16, and the tasters continued their job, knowing that despite their best efforts, poison had succeeded anyway. But Rome didn't give up on food tasters after Claudius. If anything, security protocols became more elaborate, more paranoid, more invasive. Under Nero himself, ironically, the number of tasters doubled. They were organized into teams that worked in shifts, ensuring fresh tasters for every meal. Because it was understood that a taster who'd consumed poison earlier in the day might not show symptoms until hours later, making them useless for detecting new poisons. Some slaves were deliberately fed small amounts of poison over months and years, building up tolerance. This practice, called Mithridatism, after King Mithridates VI of Pontus, who supposedly made himself immune to poison, was both common and horrific, because building immunity meant chronic poisoning, meant slow, cumulative damage to every organ system. These slaves lived in constant, low-grade agony. Their bodies twitched involuntarily. They suffered seizures, hallucinations, episodes of paralysis. Some went blind, others lost their hearing. Many developed tumors, growths, mysterious illnesses that physicians couldn't explain or treat. But they could eat poison and survive, at least temporarily. The antidote arms race became its own industry. Wealthy Romans consumed mithridate, a legendary compound supposedly containing 64 ingredients including viper flesh, opium, and crushed emeralds. It probably did nothing, but the placebo effect of believing you were protected was itself valuable. Other supposed antidotes included drinking small amounts of venom daily, consuming activated charcoal before meals, eating specific herbs that supposedly neutralize toxins. Terra sigillata, sealed earth from specific locations, was sold at enormous prices with claims it could counteract any poison. None of them worked reliably, but that didn't stop people from trying, because dinner parties in Rome weren't just social occasions. They were minefields. Political rivals gathered around the same table, smiling and toasting while plotting each other's deaths. Wives poisoned husbands. Husbands poisoned wives. Children poisoned parents to speed up their inheritance. Livia, wife of Emperor Augustus, was rumored to have maintained a poison garden in her private villa. Specific plants cultivated for their lethal properties. Their extracts used to eliminate rivals, inconvenient relatives, anyone who threatened her power or her son's succession. She supposedly killed Augustus himself, though the evidence is circumstantial. The story goes that she painted poison onto the figs growing on his favorite tree, the one he liked to pick from personally, the one place where his food tasters couldn't protect him. True or not, the story reveals something essential about Roman life. Paranoia wasn't mental illness, it was survival. Trusting anyone, even family, even tasters specifically employed for your protection, was potentially fatal. And so the protocols became more extreme. Some emperors had food prepared in sealed rooms, watched by guards, transported in locked containers. Others ate only food they'd seen harvested or hunted themselves. Still others employed food tasters who were members of their own family, reasoning that relatives wouldn't poison food they might have to eat themselves. But poison always found a way, because human creativity in the service of murder is essentially limitless. Would you survive the dinner table in ancient Rome? Let us know where in the world you're watching from, and hit that subscribe button so we can keep uncovering history's most twisted jobs. Because trust me, we're just getting started on this journey through history's most terrifying professions. The Romans thought they'd perfected the art of poison detection, but in China, they were operating on an entirely different level. You're 22 years old, and you haven't felt your legs in 3 years. Not since the surgery. Not since they made you what you are now. A eunuch in service to the Han Emperor, standing in the underground tasting chamber beneath the palace at Luoyang. It's 217 AD, and winter has frozen the Yellow River solid. But down here, in rooms carved from living rock, the temperature never changes. Always cool, always dark, always filled with the smell of earth and something else. Fear, maybe, or resignation. 10 boys stand with you. Ages range from 14 to 30. All eunuchs, all trained since childhood for this specific purpose. Not just to taste the emperor's food, but to understand poison with the intimacy of scholars studying sacred texts. 47 varieties of toxic plants by taste alone. You can identify arsenic from its garlic-like aftertaste, distinguish between different preparations of aconite, recognize the subtle numbness that indicates monkshood. You've been dosed with small amounts of various poisons throughout your training, building partial immunity while learning to recognize symptoms before they become fatal. The food arrives in sealed containers, carried down by guards who speak to no one. Today's meal includes braised turtle, pickled vegetables, rice wine infused with herbs, and a soup made from tiger bone and ginseng. Each dish represents not just calories but politics. The turtle came from a southern province, the wine from a western merchant, the ginseng from a northern tributary state. Any of them could be a message. Any of them could be a weapon. The protocol is precise, refined through centuries of paranoia into something approaching ritual. Each taster samples a different dish. You draw the soup, you lift the bowl to your lips, inhale its steam, checking for unusual scents. Then a small sip, held in your mouth for a full minute, coating every surface, allowing your tongue to detect any wrongness. You swallow. Now you wait. Not minutes, hours. Because the Chinese mastered delayed poisons long before anyone else understood they were possible. Tasteless compounds that accumulated in the body over days or weeks. Substances that mimicked natural illness, making death look like bad luck rather than murder. Toxins that were only lethal when combined with specific foods, meaning the poison could be administered days in advance, harmless, until the victim ate the trigger food. You're led to a chamber where you'll spend the next 12 hours, monitored, observed, your pulse checked every 30 minutes, your eyes examined for dilation, your skin checked for rashes, swelling, discoloration, your tongue inspected, your urine collected and analyzed. If you survive 12 hours, the food is considered safe. If you show symptoms, physicians attempt treatment while trying to identify the poison. If you die, well, at least the emperor knows not to eat the soup. 3 chambers over, you can hear another taster vomiting. He'd drawn the pickled vegetables. This is his 4th hour. Could be food poisoning, could be actual poison. Either way, the vegetables won't be served. Deaths were expected. Some courts even rotated boys weekly, reasoning that no taster should serve too long. Loyalty fades when the antidotes fail. Fresh boys, desperate to prove themselves, hungry for the relatively good treatment that came with the position, were considered more reliable. Because the job, despite its obvious dangers, came with benefits, regular meals, clean clothing, education. You learned to read and write, something impossible for most Chinese peasants. You studied medicine, herbology, philosophy. You lived in the palace complex, protected from the chaos of the world outside. And if you survived long enough, retirement was possible. Some former tasters became court physicians, using their intimate knowledge of poisons to treat illnesses. Others became advisors on security matters. A few even achieved minor government positions, but most died. In this chamber, or one like it, their bodies cremated without ceremony, their names forgotten. The boy 3 chambers over has stopped vomiting. Good sign. Or he's dead. Hard to tell until someone checks. You focus on your own body, cataloging every sensation. Your stomach feels warm, but that's normal with hot soup. Your fingers tingle slightly, but they always do. A side effect of a poison you survived 2 years ago. Your vision is clear. Your breathing steady. 4 hours pass. 6, 8. A physician enters, checks your pulse, your eyes, your tongue, nods. You've survived another tasting. The soup will be served to the emperor tonight. If he dies anyway, if there's some poison you missed, some toxin your training didn't prepare you for, you'll be executed for incompetence. Beheaded in the palace courtyard as a warning to other tasters about the cost of failure. But that's tomorrow's problem. Tonight, you've survived. Again. The odds get worse with every tasting, but you've beaten them one more time. No one should taste for too long. Loyalty fades when the antidote fails. But you've tasted for 3 years now. Your body is a catalogue of scars, visible and invisible. Your hands shake sometimes for no reason. You have headaches that last for days. Your stomach cramps randomly. Phantom poisonings that never quite go away. You wonder how much longer you can do this. How many more tastings your ruined body can endure. Then you remember the alternative, the rice paddies where you were born, the hunger, the cold, the absolute poverty that made castration and palace service seem like a gift rather than a curse. You'd choose this life again, even knowing what it costs. Because at least here, you matter. Your death would mean something. Your survival protects the emperor, maintains the dynasty, preserves the empire. Out there, you are nothing. In here, you're essential. Even if essential means dying slowly, poison by poison, tasting by tasting, until your body gives out and they replace you with another boy who dreams of importance. The guard returns. There's another tasting tomorrow. The emperor is hosting a banquet for foreign dignitaries. 30 dishes, which means 30 tastings, which means tomorrow, someone in these chambers probably won't survive. You hope it's not you. You hope it's never you. But hope doesn't neutralize poison. If China perfected the science of delayed poison, Persia made an art of the protocol surrounding it, made the tasting itself into theater. You didn't just taste the king's food, you tasted his suspicion. It's 542 AD, and you're seated not against the wall, not standing in some servant's position, but right beside King Khosrow, the first of the Sassanid Empire, the greatest ruler Persia has seen in a generation, a man who rebuilt an empire, defeated Rome's armies, and turned his court into a center of learning that attracted scholars from 3 continents. And you, a food taster, sit at his right hand during every meal. This wasn't punishment or paranoia, it was protocol. In Persia, the food taster didn't serve from a distance. He sat with the king, ate from dishes immediately before the king touched them, and engaged in conversation while waiting to see if he would die. The logic was elegant and horrifying. If the taster was positioned across the room, an assassin could poison just the king's portion without touching what the taster consumed. But if the taster sat beside the king, ate from the same dishes, breathed the same air, touched the same utensils, any poison would affect both of them equally. Of course, this meant the king had to watch his taster potentially die during every meal. The dining hall is magnificent. Walls covered in blue tiles arranged in geometric patterns that seem to shift in the lamplight. Carpets from India piled 5 deep. Musicians playing softly in a corner. The scent of saffron rice, roasted lamb, pomegranate sauce, mint tea. Everything about this room speaks of wealth, power, civilization, except for your presence. A reminder that all this beauty, all this power, all this glory exists one bite away from death. The first dish arrives. Chicken cooked with walnuts and pomegranate paste, a Persian specialty, one of the king's favorites. You take a portion onto your plate, wait for a servant to do the same for the king, then eat while he watches. The chicken is perfect. Tender meat, rich sauce, the sourness of pomegranate balanced by honey and spices. You swallow, count to 30 in your head, continue eating. If you collapse now, clutching your throat, foaming at the mouth, the king would simply stand and leave. The meal would end. Guards would immediately arrest everyone who'd touched the food, from the cook to the servant who carried it. By sunset, dozens would be executed. But that's assuming immediate poison. The real nightmare is delayed toxins, which is why the protocol demands you sit through the entire meal. 2 hours, sometimes 3, eating and drinking and talking while the king observes you for any sign of distress. A bead of sweat, a tremor in your hands, a moment of nausea, any hint that something is wrong. The conversation is part of the torture. The king asks about your family, your health, your thoughts on philosophy. He's not being friendly, he's baseline checking, establishing your normal manner of speech, your color, your bearing, so that any change, any deviation, becomes immediately visible. You tell him your son has learned to read. This is true, the king nods approvingly. Your son exists as leverage, though neither of you acknowledges this explicitly. If you fail, if you miss a poison, if you die and the king dies too, your family pays the price. But if you succeed, if you keep surviving, your family prospers. Better housing, better food, education for your children, the promise of a government position when you can no longer serve. You've been the king's taster for 7 years. You're 32 years old. You feel 60. The next dish arrives. Rice cooked with saffron and barberries, then lamb kebabs, then a yogurt sauce with cucumbers, then dates stuffed with almonds, then, finally, wine. Wine is the most dangerous, easiest to poison, hardest to detect. You'd be amazed how many toxins are tasteless when dissolved in wine, their bitterness or strange flavors masked by alcohol and spices. You take a deep breath, lift the cup, sip. The wine is good, sweet, and strong. You drink more. The king drinks after you, his eyes never leaving your face. Halfway through the meal, you feel something. Not pain exactly, just a faint warmth in your chest. Could be the wine, could be the spices, could be poison. You don't mention it. Not yet. Because false alarms are almost as dangerous as missed poisons. If you raise concerns about every strange sensation, every moment of indigestion, you'll lose the king's trust. Tasters who cried poison too often were replaced with less anxious men. But if you stay silent and this is real poison, you're both dead. You take another bite of lamb. The warmth intensifies slightly. Your heart rate increases. Could still be nothing, could be the beginning of something fatal. The king is watching you. He's noticed something. A change in your expression maybe, a slight pallor. "The lamb," you say quietly. Something about the lamb. The king sets down his fork immediately. Doesn't argue, doesn't question. He trusts your judgment because he has to. Guards rush in. The lamb is removed. The cook is arrested. The servant who carried it is arrested. The butcher who sold it is arrested. Everyone who could have touched that lamb is taken to the dungeons. 2 hours later, you vomit. Not violently, just enough to confirm something was wrong. The physicians examine what you've purged, test it with various reagents. Finally determine the lamb was tainted with a mild poison, not enough to kill quickly but sufficient to cause serious illness. Whether it was deliberate or accidental is unclear. Maybe the butcher sold spoiled meat. Maybe someone bribed him to contaminate it. Either way, 40 people are executed over the next 3 days. Their bodies hung from the palace gates as a warning. You saved the king's life. You get a bonus. Gold coins and a new house, and a week of rest. Then you're back at his side, eating from the same dishes, waiting to see if today is the day a poison slips through. Because the real horror of being a taster in Persia wasn't the danger, it was the intimacy. You couldn't maintain distance, couldn't separate yourself psychologically from the king's fate. You sat beside him, ate with him, conversed with him. If he died, you'd be blamed for failing to protect him. If you died, he'd simply select another taster and continue his meal. You were simultaneously essential and disposable, trusted and suspected, protected and expendable. Persian nobles often tested their tasters' loyalty with non-lethal poisons first. Small doses of substances that caused vomiting or diarrhea but weren't fatal. If a taster reported these honestly, he could be trusted. If he tried to hide symptoms, protecting his position over the king's safety, he was replaced. Sometimes with his own son, forced into the role as punishment for his father's dishonesty. You've seen 3 other tasters die during your tenure. One from actual poison, the others from natural causes. Their bodies worn out from years of exposure. Each time, the replacement arrived within hours. Young men, often relatives of the previous taster, continuing a family tradition of service and sacrifice. Your own son is being trained now, just in case. Learning to identify poisons by taste, building tolerance to common toxins, understanding the protocols that govern every meal. You hope he never has to use that training, but you know better than to assume mercy from fate. The king is looking at you again. There's another course coming, pastries soaked in honey. Your stomach still feels wrong from the tainted lamb, but you can't refuse. You taste, you swallow, you wait. This is your life. This is all your life will ever be, until the day the antidote doesn't work. Even antidotes can be poisoned. You're in France now. The year is 1612, and you're standing in a storage room beneath the palace of Fontainebleau, holding a small glass vial between thumb and forefinger like it's a sacred relic. In a way, it is. This vial contains the only thing standing between you and death, universal antidote, prepared by the royal physician, supposedly capable of neutralizing any poison you might encounter. The liquid inside is brownish yellow, cloudy, with sediment settled at the bottom. It smells like rotted flowers mixed with vinegar. You're supposed to drink a spoonful before every tasting, giving your body advanced protection against whatever toxins might be hiding in the king's food. You've been using this antidote for 3 months. You've tasted successfully through dozens of meals. You've survived. Therefore, the antidote must work. This is what you tell yourself as you measure out a dose, as you swallow it down despite the foul taste, as you head upstairs to perform your duties. Tonight's dinner is elaborate. King Louis XIII is hosting visiting nobility from Savoy, and the kitchens have prepared a feast worthy of the occasion. Roasted swan, venison in wine sauce, elaborate pastries shaped like castles, and wine, casks of it, brought up from cellars where bottles have aged for decades. You begin with the wine, a deep red from Burgundy, supposedly one of the finest vintages in France. You pour yourself a small glass, swirl it like you've seen nobles do. Inhale its bouquet. Smells perfect. You sip. Tastes perfect. Warm and rich and complex. Layers of flavor that develop on the tongue. You swallow. You wait. Nothing. The wine is safe. Also, you think. The meal proceeds. Course after course, you taste everything before it reaches the king's table. Your stomach feels uncomfortably, but that's normal. Tasters often ate more than the nobility they served, sampling every dish, while the aristocrats pick delicately at their favorites. The dinner lasts 3 hours. You're dismissed just before midnight, Your duty's complete for another evening. You feel fine, tired, overfull, but fine. The antidote has worked again. You retire to your quarters, a small room near the kitchens. Privilege of the position. Most servants slept in communal barracks. You get privacy, a bed with actual sheets, a window that opens onto the palace gardens. You fall asleep thinking about your daughter. She's getting married next month. Your position, your salary, your proximity to the king have made possible a dowry that will secure her future. Everything you've endured, every poison you've survived, has purpose. You wake at 3 in the morning. Your chest feels wrong, tight, like someone is sitting on your ribs. You try to take a deep breath, but your lungs won't expand properly, just shallow sips of air that aren't enough. You sit up, the room spins, your heart is racing, pounding so hard you can feel it in your throat. Your hands are tingling, your vision is tunneling, darkness creeping in from the edges. This is poison. You recognize the symptoms from training, from watching other tasters die. But how? You tasted everything. You felt fine for hours. You took the antidote, unless the thought arrives too late, but it arrives. What if the antidote itself was compromised? Antidotes don't last forever. They degrade over time, especially the complex mixtures used in royal courts. Ingredients react with each other, break down, lose potency, or worse, transform into something toxic themselves. How old was the antidote you'd been using? Months, certainly. Maybe a year. Stored in a room that wasn't temperature controlled, that got hot in summer and cold in winter, exposed to conditions that could spoil even stable compounds. Or maybe it wasn't accidental. Maybe someone knew that tasters relied on antidotes, trusted them completely. Maybe poisoning the antidote was the perfect way to get poison past a taster's defenses. You drink the contaminated antidote, thinking it's protecting you. You taste the wine, which might contain a small amount of poison, not enough to trigger immediate symptoms. But combined with the toxins already in your system from the spoiled antidote, the cumulative dose becomes lethal. You try to stand, thinking you can make it to the physician's quarters, but your legs don't work properly. You collapse, knocking over the small table beside your bed. The sound should bring help, but at 3 in the morning, in this distant corner of the palace, no one hears. Your breathing is getting worse, shallow gasps that don't bring enough air. Your heart feels like it's going to burst through your chest. Your fingers and toes are numb. Your lips are tingling. You think about your daughter, about her wedding that you won't attend, about the dowry that might be confiscated when they realize you died not from loyal service but from contaminated antidotes, which could be blamed on you somehow, turned into evidence of conspiracy or incompetence. You think about the king, sleeping safely in his chambers, protected by your death, because that's what you realize now. You didn't just taste the wine. You revealed the poison by dying from it. Mission accomplished in the most permanent way possible. The darkness at the edges of your vision is expanding. Your thoughts are fragmenting. The pain in your chest is overwhelming. Your last coherent thought is bitter and small. The antidote killed me faster than the poison would have. You're found 12 hours later by a servant coming to wake you for the day's duties. Your body is cold, your skin mottled purple and blue, foam dried on your lips. The room smells like vomit and worse things. The royal physician examines you briefly, declares death by natural causes, probably heart failure. No investigation is launched because tasters die all the time, their bodies worn out by their profession. Your position is filled within a day. Your belongings are packed and sent to your family, along with a letter expressing the king's regret at your passing. Your daughter still gets married. The dowry holds. Your service is considered honorable. Your death is forgotten within a week. Except, 2 months later, the same wine from the same casks is served at another dinner. This time, the taster survives, but the king becomes ill, not fatally, but severely. Vomiting, convulsions, 3 days of delirium. An investigation reveals that the wine had been tampered with. Just slightly, not enough to kill quickly, but sufficient to cause serious harm. The poison was designed to accumulate over multiple exposures, becoming dangerous only after several tastings. You'd been exposed before. At previous dinners, the night you died wasn't the first time you'd consumed that wine. It was just the time when your body, already compromised by contaminated antidotes and years of poison exposure, finally couldn't compensate anymore. The plot had been in motion for months, subtle, patient, counting on the fact that tasters died regularly enough that one more death wouldn't raise immediate suspicion. And it had worked. That mistake exposed a plot to kill the king, which had worked just too late. Because while the king survived his illness, 6 of his advisors didn't. The poison, once identified, was traced back through palace records. Every meal where that wine had been served, every person who had consumed it. The conspirators had been slowly dosing members of the king's inner circle for nearly a year, weakening them, making them sick, waiting for the accumulation to reach lethal levels. Your death was the canary in the coal mine, but no one had been paying attention. By the time they connected the patterns, mapped the deaths and illnesses, understood the scope of the conspiracy, 17 people were dead, including you, including the pastry chef who'd probably been innocent but was tortured until he confessed anyway, including a serving girl who'd slept with the wrong nobleman and knew too much. The actual conspirators? 3 were caught and executed publicly, their bodies broken on wheels in the square outside Notre Dame. But the others, the ones with enough money and connections to flee, disappeared into Italy or Spain or the German states. Justice is only certain when you're poor enough to be disposable. Your name appears in the official records exactly once, listed among the king's faithful servants who died in service. No mention of how, no acknowledgement that your death revealed the conspiracy, no compensation beyond what your family already received. Because acknowledging that a taster's death had meaning, that it was evidence rather than accident, would mean admitting the system had failed, that all the protocols and procedures and elaborate precautions hadn't prevented poison from reaching the king's table for nearly a year. Better to call it natural causes, better to replace you quickly and move on. Even antidotes can be poisoned, even protection can kill you. And the worst part? The system didn't change. New tasters were assigned, new antidotes were prepared. The same vulnerabilities remained because eliminating them would require admitting they existed in the first place. Power doesn't learn from mistakes. It just finds new people to make them. But if you think poisoning ended with the Renaissance, that modern times made this profession obsolete, you'd be dangerously wrong. In the 20th century, they didn't stop tasting. They just called it testing. You're 15 years old, German, and terrified. It's 1943, and you've just been selected for a position at the Wolf's Lair, Hitler's military headquarters in East Prussia. You should feel honored. Instead, you feel like you're walking into your own grave. Your name is Margot Volk, though that name will mean nothing to history for 70 years. You won't speak about what happens next until you're in your 90s, until everyone who could punish you for talking is dead, until the shame and fear have aged into something you can finally articulate. They bring you to a bunker beneath the complex. Concrete walls, 3 feet thick, air that tastes like metal and fear. 14 other young women are already there, sitting at a long table, their faces pale in the fluorescent lighting. A uniformed officer explains the procedure. You will taste Adolf Hitler's food 3 times a day. Breakfast, lunch, dinner. You will eat every dish before it's transported to the Führer's private dining room. You will eat it completely, not just sample it. Because Hitler is a vegetarian, and his food requires thorough testing. The irony would be funny if it wasn't your life. The man orchestrating genocide across Europe is so concerned about his own safety that he requires 15 women to eat his vegetables before he'll touch them. The meals arrive in sealed containers, carried by SS guards who speak to no one. The food is actually good, better than anything you've eaten in months. Fresh vegetables, fruit, bread still warm from the oven. No meat, ever. Hitler's dietary restrictions are well known. You eat, all of you eat, silently, watching each other for signs of distress, waiting to see if this meal will be your last. Then you wait, 45 minutes. If no one shows symptoms, the food is cleared for the Führer. If someone gets sick, if anyone so much as complains of a stomachache, the entire meal is destroyed and investigations begin. You never see Hitler. Not once in all the months you serve. You just taste his food in this underground bunker and wonder if today will be the day someone finally succeeds in poisoning it. Years later you'll say, I never saw him. Only the food, only the waiting. The psychological torture of modern food tasting was different from ancient versions, but no less cruel. You weren't a slave, you weren't technically forced, but refusing meant being sent to a concentration camp or executed as a defector. So you ate Hitler's meals and prayed for survival and tried not to think about what your existence represented. You were human shields made of flesh and digestion. Your bodies were early warning systems. Your potential death was a security measure. The Nazis didn't invent this. They just industrialized it, made it efficient, stripped away any pretense of honor or privilege. You weren't valued servants close to power. You were biological sensors, no different than the canaries miners brought underground to detect poison gas. One of the women in your group, a girl named Elizabeth, got sick 3 weeks into the assignment. Stomach cramps, vomiting, fever. Was it poison? Food poisoning? Stress? No one knew. She was removed, disappeared. You never learned what happened to her. Her seat was filled the next day. The Soviet army liberated the area in 1945. You survived the war. You survived the tasting. You escaped to the West and tried to forget. Didn't talk about it for decades because who would believe you? Who would care about 15 women who ate Hitler's vegetables? But you weren't alone. Every paranoid dictator, every threatened leader, every head of state who feared assassination employed food tasters through the 20th century. They just called them different things. Food safety officers, dietary consultants, security personnel. Stalin had an entire team that tested not just his food but his drinking water, his tobacco, even the air in rooms where he slept. After he died, possibly poisoned despite all precautions, Khrushchev expanded the program. During the Cold War, poison became sophisticated in ways that would amaze ancient Romans. The Americans developed toxins so precise they could trigger heart attacks indistinguishable from natural causes. The Soviets created poisons that worked through skin contact, through inhalation, through routes that no food taster could intercept. Georgy Markov, Bulgarian dissident, killed in London in 1978 by a pellet fired from an umbrella tip. The pellet contained ricin, derived from castor beans, lethal in microscopic doses. By the time symptoms appeared, he was already dying. Alexander Litvinenko, former FSB officer, killed in London in 2006 with polonium-210 mixed into his tea. Radioactive poison that destroyed his body from the inside out, cell by cell. He died in agony over 3 weeks while doctors watched helplessly. Food tasters wouldn't have saved either man, because modern assassination had evolved beyond anything ancient protocols could address. But that didn't stop powerful people from employing tasters. Saddam Hussein had multiple food tasters, rotated randomly so no one knew who would taste which meal. Gaddafi employed food tasters and also refused to eat anything not prepared by his personal chef, who was kept under constant guard. Kim Jong-il reportedly had women taste his food, reasoning they were less likely to be part of military conspiracies. His son, Kim Jong-un, continues the tradition, though details are murky. Vladimir Putin's meals are reportedly tested by a special security service that analyzes everything for toxins before it reaches his plate. Not human tasters in the traditional sense, but laboratory equipment serving the same function, detecting poison before the leader consumes it. The technology improved. The paranoia didn't change. In the 20th century, they didn't stop tasting. They just called it testing, because the fundamental equation remained unchanged. Power attracts enemies. Enemies use poison. Poison requires detection. Detection requires someone or something to consume it first. Human or machine, the principle is identical. Someone else goes first. Someone else takes the risk. Someone else dies so the leader can feel safe eating his dinner. The methods became more sophisticated. The job title changed. The reality stayed exactly the same. And sometimes, very rarely, the person tasked with protection made a choice that changed everything. He tasted death and passed it on. Constantinople, 1071 AD. You're standing in the imperial kitchens of the Byzantine palace, watching cooks prepare Emperor Romanos IV's evening meal. You've been his chief food taster for 7 years, the most trusted position in his household. You've saved his life 3 times by detecting poison. You've eaten food that should have killed you and survived through luck and antidotes and the favor of God. Tonight, you're going to let him die. Not because you hate him, not because you've been bribed or threatened, though offers have been made and you've considered them, but because you've realized something that changes everything. Romanos is going to lose the war against the Turks. His military campaign is doomed. His reign will end in disaster. And when he falls, everyone associated with him falls too, including food tasters. The Empress, Eudokia, has made certain suggestions, nothing explicit, just quiet conversations about the future, about how the empire needs stability, about how military defeat would mean chaos, about how men of intelligence and foresight would be valued in whatever administration came next. You understand perfectly. She's offering you a choice: die with Romanos or survive by allowing his death. The meal being prepared is elaborate. Roasted fish stuffed with herbs, bread soaked in wine, vegetables in oil, and a special dish, requested by the emperor himself, mushrooms in garlic sauce. The mushrooms came from a trusted supplier. Or rather, they came from someone who used to be trusted before Eudokia's agents reached him. The supplier doesn't know his shipment has been altered. Just a few death caps mixed with the edible varieties. Not enough to be obvious, just enough to be lethal. The cooks don't know. They're preparing the mushrooms with their usual care, slicing them thin, sautéing them in golden oil, adding garlic and herbs. The dish smells incredible. Your job is to taste it before it reaches the emperor, to detect any wrongness, to raise alarm if something seems suspicious. You taste the mushrooms. They're delicious, earthy and rich, the garlic perfectly balanced, the texture just right. You recognize the faint bitterness of death caps underneath the other flavors, subtle enough that someone less experienced might miss it. But you've been trained for this. You know what you're tasting. You swallow. You wait the appropriate interval. You turn to the head cook and nod. The food is safe, you say. The mushrooms go to the emperor's table. You don't accompany them. That's not unusual. Chief tasters don't attend every meal. You've done your job. Your responsibility ends with the tasting. You go to your quarters and wait. 3 hours later, the emperor begins showing symptoms. Stomach cramps, vomiting. By midnight, he's convulsing. By dawn, he's dead. The palace erupts in chaos. Guards arrest the cooks. The mushroom supplier is tortured. Confesses to everything and nothing is executed. Dozens of servants are imprisoned. The investigation is theatrical and thorough, and completely beside the point. No one questions you. Why would they? You tasted the food and declared it safe. Obviously, the poison was introduced after you performed your duties. Or the emperor was poisoned through some other route. Or this was illness, not poison at all. You're summoned to testify before the investigating committee. You describe your procedures in detail. Explain how you tasted every dish. Express shock and grief that poison somehow reached the emperor despite your precautions. They believe you because you're the food taster. Your job is protection. Your entire purpose is preventing exactly what just happened. 3 weeks later, Eudokia's chosen successor is crowned emperor. You're not only kept on as chief food taster but promoted. Better quarters, higher salary, additional responsibilities. Your family receives land grants and titles. You've murdered your emperor and been rewarded for it. The guilt is complicated. Romanos was not a bad man, just an unsuccessful one. And in the Byzantine court, failure was unforgivable. He would have been deposed eventually, probably murdered anyway. You just accelerated the inevitable. This is what you tell yourself. In daylight, surrounded by the benefits of your decision, it almost seems reasonable. At night, you dream about mushrooms, about their earthy taste, about the moment you nodded and said the food was safe, about Romanos's face as the poison worked through his system, destroying his organs, killing him cell by cell. Sometimes, in the dreams, he knows. He looks at you while dying and understands what you've done. Forgives you, even, because he was Byzantine too. He understood the game. He would have done the same in your position. Or so you tell yourself. You serve the new emperor for 12 years, save his life twice, by detecting actual poison, which Eudokia's agents allow through to maintain your credibility. Die peacefully in your sleep at age 56, respected and wealthy, your children positioned in government, your legacy secure. History records Romanos IV's death as assassination by unknown conspirators. Your name appears in the records as his loyal food taster, who somehow failed to detect the poison. No one ever suspects the truth. Why would they? He tasted death and passed it on. Sometimes, the most dangerous man at the table wasn't the king. It was the person tasked with protecting him. Because food tasters had access, had knowledge, had the perfect cover for murder disguised as incompetence. The system was designed to protect against external threats. But what happens when the threat comes from within? When the person whose job is detection decides detection isn't in his best interest? The answer is, an emperor dies. A new regime takes power, and the food taster gets a promotion. Power doesn't just corrupt the powerful, it corrupts everyone close enough to touch it. But for most tasters, betrayal wasn't an option. The consequences were too severe, the surveillance too complete, the alternatives too limited. For most, survival meant silence. You tasted every meal. and your final reward was silence. You're 62 years old, which is ancient for someone in your profession. Most food tasters die young, poisoned, sick from chronic exposure, or simply worn out by stress. But you've survived. 38 years serving 3 different emperors in the Byzantine court, hundreds of meals, thousands of tastings. More poison than any human body should be able to endure. It's 1117 AD, and Emperor John II has just died. Not from poison, he was gored by a wild boar during a hunt. Ironic, really. All that care with his food, and he dies from a hunting accident. His son, Manuel, is being crowned next week. You're present for the preparations because where else would you be? You've served this family your entire adult life. You know their dietary preferences, their allergies, their paranoia. You know which rival families might attempt assassination. You know secrets that could destroy dynasties, which is precisely the problem. The new emperor's chancellor summons you to a private meeting. You're shown into a chamber you've never seen before, deep in the oldest part of the palace. Stone walls weeping moisture, no windows, a single torch providing light. 3 physicians wait inside. You understand immediately. This isn't about your health. This is about your silence. The chancellor explains it gently, almost apologetically. You've served loyally. Your discretion is appreciated. But the new emperor needs to start his reign without complications, without loose ends, without people who know too much about his father's secrets, his grandfather's indiscretions, the family's vulnerabilities. They're not going to kill you. That would be dishonorable after your years of service. Instead, they're going to ensure you can never speak about what you've witnessed. The physicians approach with their instruments, bronze tools that gleam in the torchlight, a leather gag to bite on, guards to hold you still. You think about running, but you're 62, arthritic from years of standing in cold kitchens, half blind from chronic headaches. You wouldn't make it to the door. You think about fighting, but there are 6 guards in the room, young men with muscles you remember having once. You think about begging, but what would be the point? This decision was made before you entered the room, so you submit. You open your mouth when they tell you to, bite down on the leather when they instruct you. Try not to scream when they cut. The pain is extraordinary. Medieval surgery without anesthesia, performed in a room that smells like mold and old blood and fear. They're not just cutting your tongue, they're removing it entirely, severing it at the base, cauterizing the wound with hot iron to stop the bleeding. You pass out from the pain, wake up choking on blood and smoke, pass out again. When you finally regain consciousness hours later, you're in a monastery, a place for retired servants. You have a small room, simple meals, and the promise of peace for whatever remains of your life. You also have no tongue, no way to speak, no way to tell anyone what you've seen, what you know, what you've survived. The monks communicate with you through simple hand gestures. They're kind, in their way. They understand that many men sent here are being silenced for inconvenient knowledge. They don't ask questions, they don't expect answers. You spend your final years in that monastery, learning to communicate through written notes, though your hand shakes so badly from decades of poison exposure that your writing is barely legible. You learn to eat soft foods that don't require chewing, that don't irritate your ravaged mouth. You learn to live with the phantom sensation of a tongue that no longer exists. Sometimes, other silenced men arrive. Eunuchs who served in the imperial bedchambers, clerks who kept sensitive records, soldiers who witnessed political murders, all of them missing pieces, tongues, hands, eyes, whatever part of them had been most dangerous to power. You try to form friendships, but communication without speech is frustrating, isolating. You write notes to each other, comparing wounds, sharing memories. One former clerk writes that he'd rather have been killed than live like this, maimed and silent, his identity erased. You're not sure you disagree. You die 5 years later, probably from infection related to your mutilation. The monks bury you in the monastery cemetery with a simple marker bearing your name. Within a generation, even that marker is gone, worn smooth by weather, your name forgotten. But you weren't unique. Throughout history, across cultures, powerful people ensured silence from those who served them too closely. In ancient Egypt, tomb builders were sometimes killed after completing their work, ensuring they couldn't reveal the location of hidden treasures. In China, eunuchs who attended private imperial ceremonies were often executed afterward. In Japan, ninja who successfully completed assassinations were frequently killed by their own employers to eliminate witnesses. Food tasters fell into this category. They witnessed everything. They were present during private meals where conspiracies were discussed, deals were made, secrets were shared. They saw emperors drunk, vulnerable, afraid. They knew which nobles visited at odd hours, which family members argued, which advisors whispered poison into imperial ears. They were living repositories of information that could destabilize governments. So they were silenced. Not always through tongue removal that was relatively rare, saved for the most sensitive situations. More often through isolation. Tasters who survived to retirement were sent to monasteries, distant estates, places where they couldn't communicate with anyone who mattered. Some were killed outright, their deaths staged as accidents or natural causes. Others simply disappeared, their fates unknown even to their families. A few were allowed normal retirements, but only if they had powerful patrons who protected them, or if they demonstrated absolute discretion over decades of service. But most ended like you, alive but effectively erased, their tongues cut out, their eyes blinded, their hands crippled, reduced to silence and shadows, their knowledge buried with their voices. The cruelest part was that this was considered merciful. They could have been executed. Instead, they were allowed to live out their days in enforced silence, maintained by the same systems they'd served. You tasted every meal, and your final reward was silence. Because power doesn't just demand your service, it demands your discretion. And when it can no longer trust your discretion, it ensures your silence through methods that make execution seem kind by comparison. You served loyally for 38 years. You saved lives. You risked your own body, over and over, eating poison so others could eat safely. And your reward? A severed tongue and a forgotten grave. This is what it meant to serve power. Not glory, not honor, not even a dignified death. Just silence. Enforced. Permanent. Complete. The monks say prayers over your grave. Within a year, no one remembers your name. Within a decade, no one remembers you existed. You tasted history, and history forgot you. But if we zoom out from these individual tragedies, if we look at the larger pattern across millennia and cultures, we see something profound about the nature of power itself. You never sat on a throne, but you held death in your mouth every day. Picture yourself now, not in any specific time or place, but moving through all of them simultaneously. You are the 13-year-old in the Han Palace, the 62-year-old in Byzantium, the German girl in Hitler's bunker, the Persian taster sitting beside the king. You are all of them, and none of them. Every person who ever performed this terrible job, stretching back through 5,000 years of recorded history. You didn't command armies, but you knew the real war was fought in the kitchen. Every civilization that achieved complexity, every culture that concentrated power in single individuals, invented some version of you. The details changed protocol, compensation, social status, but the core remained constant. Someone had to eat first. Someone had to risk death so power could dine safely. This wasn't just about poison. It was about trust, or rather, the impossibility of trust when power reaches absolute levels. Think about what it means that emperors, kings, dictators, and presidents across 5 millennia and 6 continents all independently decided they needed food tasters. What does that tell us about the nature of concentrated authority? It tells us that everyone close to power wants it for themselves, that families can't be trusted, that friends become enemies when stakes grow high enough, that the person closest to you, spouse, child, advisor, might be the person most likely to kill you. Food tasters existed because paranoia at the top wasn't mental illness. It was accurate threat assessment. But here's the deeper horror. The system never worked. Not really. Emperors still got poisoned. Kings still died from tainted food. The tasters caught some attempts, missed others, and in rare cases became the assassins themselves. Yet the position persisted because power needed the illusion of control more than actual safety. Employing food tasters meant taking precautions, demonstrating awareness, maintaining protocols. Whether those protocols actually prevented death was almost secondary to the performance of security. You were theater as much as protection. Your presence at meals reassured the powerful that they'd done everything possible to stay alive. When poison succeeded anyway, it was your failure, not the system's inadequacy. The spoon was a blade. The goblet was a grave. The table a throne of bones. Every meal was a battlefield. Every bite was a gamble. Every swallow was faith in uncertain antidotes and compromised protection. You tasted wine that had been aged in lead-lined casks, slowly poisoning you even when no assassin was involved. You ate meat that had rotted slightly, fish that carried parasites, bread made with contaminated grain. You ingested the entire range of pre-modern food dangers, plus intentional poisons, plus antidotes that were sometimes more toxic than the substances they supposedly neutralized. Your body became a catalog of damage, your liver scarred from processing toxins, your kidneys failing from chronic exposure, your nervous system misfiring from accumulated heavy metals, your stomach lining eroded from acids and venoms and compounds that had no name because chemistry hadn't been invented yet. You survived years, maybe decades if you were lucky or unlucky depending on perspective. Then you died, often young, always damaged, frequently forgotten. And here's what makes it truly tragic. You were essential, and you were worthless simultaneously. Essential because without you, the emperor couldn't eat safely. Worthless because you could be replaced within hours. Your death meaning nothing except a slight inconvenience in the palace schedule. You had access to power without possessing it. You were trusted with the ruler's life but not with honor, respect, or remembrance. You existed in a paradox, absolutely necessary and completely disposable. This is what power tastes like. Not the glory of command or the satisfaction of achievement, but the flavor of fear served 3 times daily with every meal. The knowledge that trust is impossible when stakes reach certain levels. The understanding that everyone, eventually, becomes expendable. The young boys in Chinese underground chambers, monitored for 12 hours after each tasting. The Persian tasters sitting beside kings, engaging in forced conversation while waiting to see if they'd survive dessert. The Roman slaves building immunity through chronic poisoning, their bodies destroyed in service of protection that never quite worked. The Byzantine tasters who survived decades, only to have their tongues cut out as retirement packages. The modern women in Hitler's bunker, eating vegetables while genocide unfolded above them. Different eras, different cultures, different political systems. Same fundamental reality. Someone had to eat first. Someone had to take the risk. Someone had to be disposable so power could feel secure. And the worst part? The deepest horror that emerges from these 5,000 years of history? It never made anyone safer. The emperors who employed the most elaborate food-tasting protocols died from poison anyway. The kings with teams of tasters were killed by toxins that slip through because no system is perfect when someone is determined enough. The dictators who tested everything still got sick because poison evolves faster than protection. Security is an illusion. Safety is a performance. Protection is theater pretending to be science. But power demands the illusion anyway, demands the protocols, demands the tasters, demands the daily performance of precaution even when everyone involved knows it's insufficient. Because admitting that safety is impossible would mean admitting that power itself is vulnerable, and that admission would undermine the entire structure. So the job persisted, through millennia, through changing technologies and evolving politics and revolutions that claimed to change everything. The job persisted because the insecurity at the heart of power never changes. You could argue that this is sad, that it represents a failure of human civilization, that 5,000 years of history should have taught us better ways to organize societies, distribute power, ensure security, without requiring human shields to taste every meal. You could argue that, and you'd be right, but you'd also be missing the point. The point is that power, by its nature, creates the conditions for its own destruction. Concentrating authority in single individuals makes those individuals targets. Making them targets creates paranoia. Paranoia creates security measures. Security measures create positions like food taster. And food tasters, despite their purpose, can never fully protect against the very danger they're meant to address. It's circular, self-defeating, tragic in the classical sense, a flaw built into the structure itself that no amount of precaution can eliminate. And yet it continues. Right now, somewhere, someone is tasting food for someone else. Maybe with modern chemical analysis instead of human stomachs. Maybe with sophisticated protocols that would amaze ancient emperors. But the fundamental transaction remains. One person risks safety so another can dine without fear. You never sat on a throne, but you held death in your mouth every day. You didn't command armies, but you knew the real war was fought in the kitchen. You weren't powerful, but you were absolutely necessary to power's continuation. And your reward? Sometimes gold, sometimes land, sometimes just survival for one more day. No one remembers the names of the food tasters, and that's the point. They weren't meant to be remembered. They were meant to be functional, to serve, to die if necessary, to be replaced, to disappear into the machinery of power without leaving marks, without demanding recognition, without expecting their suffering to mean anything beyond the immediate utility it provided. This is what 5,000 years of food tasters teach us. Power consumes people, grinds them up in its functioning, uses their bodies as tools, their deaths as data points, their suffering as the price of someone else's security. And we accept this, we always have. Because the alternative would be admitting that power itself might not be worth the cost. So, we build systems that require human sacrifice disguised as employment. We create jobs that kill the people who perform them. We establish protocols that treat human beings as expendable sensors in elaborate security theater. And we call it civilization. The next time you sit down to a meal, think about this. Somewhere in history, someone died to make that exact act, eating without fear, possible for people with enough power to demand it. Someone tasted first. Someone waited to see if they'd survive. Someone offered their body as a shield against invisible dangers. And most of the time, no one even remembered their name. Which of these courts was the most twisted? The Chinese underground chambers where boys were monitored for 12 hours after each tasting? The Persian protocol that made tasters sit beside kings, engaging in conversation while waiting for death? The Byzantine practice of cutting out tongues as retirement packages? The modern efficiency of Hitler's bunker where young women ate vegetables while genocide unfolded above them? Drop your answer in the comments. And if you want us to cover history's worst job next, hit that subscribe button. Because as horrifying as food tasters had it, there were positions even more degrading, even more dangerous, even more often, a forgotten grave, an erased name, a silence enforced through mutilation or isolation or simple historical amnesia. No one remembers the names of the food tasters. They weren't meant to be remembered. They were meant to be functional, to serve, to die if necessary, to be replaced, to disappear into the machinery of power without leaving marks, without demanding recognition, without expecting their suffering to mean anything beyond the immediate utility it provided. This is what 5,000 years of food tasters teach us. Power consumes people, grinds them up in its functioning, uses their bodies as tools, their deaths as data points, their suffering as the price of someone else's security. And we accept this. We always have. Because the alternative would be admitting that power itself might not be worth the cost. So we build systems that require human sacrifice disguised as employment. We create jobs that kill the people who perform them. We establish protocols that treat human beings as expendable sensors in elaborate security theater. And we call it civilization. The next time you sit down to a meal, think about this. Somewhere in history, someone died to make that exact act, eating without fear, possible for people with enough power to demand it. Someone tasted first. Someone waited to see if they'd survive. Someone offered their body as a shield against invisible dangers. And most of the time, no one even remembered their name. Which of these courts was the most twisted? The Chinese underground chambers where boys were monitored for 12 hours after each tasting? The Persian protocol that made tasters sit beside kings, engaging in conversation while waiting for death? The Byzantine practice of cutting out tongues as retirement packages? The modern efficiency of Hitler's bunker where young women ate vegetables while genocide unfolded above them? Drop your answer in the comments. And if you want us to cover history's worst job next, hit that subscribe button. Because, as horrifying as food tasters had it, there were positions even more degrading, even more dangerous, even more forgotten. We're just getting started on this journey through the jobs no one wanted but someone always had to do. The positions that built empires on mountains of corpses whose names we'll never know. The food taster is dead. Long live the food taster. Someone has to eat first. Someone always has to eat first. The faces change. The centuries pass. The job remains. And history forgets them all. And if you stayed this far, please subscribe to the channel and watch this video next about the most inbred man in European history.